comrades, welcome back to the Liberation Hour. It is September 3rd, Wednesday, 7 p.m., and we're back here once again. Hello, everyone. Those who are listening live, hey. For those who are watching on YouTube, hello in the future. All right. So, this episode 7 on queer liberation and labor struggle. Folks, welcome back to Liberation Hour. And as always, right before we get started, we have the top of the hour disclaimer. WRFU is an open forum for the Urbana-Champaign online community. Views expressed are those of the speakers and are not intended to represent WRFU UCIMC. All right. Shall we? Shall we get into it? I suppose we shall. All right, folks. So we have a couple of announcements today. It's the same old stuff. Red Youth Rising 10 campaign will be kicking off very soon. Keep a lookout. If you are a student looking to unionize your building, if you're a regular person looking to unionize your building, looking to form a tenants union, please reach out to Red Youth Rising. We'd love to work together. And on top of that, we have Labor Talks, the first meeting happening September 24th. I believe that's in 3 weeks. 2, 3? I'll have to check my calendar. But September 24th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Channing Murray. If you're interested, come by, listen to what is Marxism-Leninism, and come for some snacks, if anything else. Free food, folks. Hello. Anyway, that's it for our announcements today, guys. Let's go ahead and get started. We have... Oh, that was my chair. We have a few things to cover today. We have actually many things to cover today. I will be starting the first 30 minutes off with the news. We have some interesting news that I have curated for us today to listen to. And then we have the first 30 minutes of my segment with Comrade Marina of Kansas City, the Kansas City chapter of the American Party of Labor, over in the Great Plains region. And we will be discussing queer liberation, queer labor struggle, different historical events which have happened in which queer people have fought for our rights, and what's the future hold. And that will be the first 30 minutes. And then after that, if you're interested in listening to the rest, you can go on over to my YouTube channel in a couple days. I know I haven't uploaded my last episode. There has been a few technical difficulties. So if you're still looking for that, stay tuned. It is happening. But for this coming episode, you can listen to Comrade Marina and I's discussion. And it's super exciting. And I am super excited to show you guys, or I guess... listen to you guys. I'm super excited to play this recording for you guys, and so you can learn more about queer liberation and queer struggle and how it has always been intertwined with the global struggle of the proletariat. And so, with that, let's go ahead and get started with our climate update. We have our first story of the night. Folks, it's China again. I know I sound like a broken record, but I gotta cover this because it's some very important news that we have to cover. So, this is from Inside Climate, reporting from Katie Surma on August 24th, 2025. A tidal wave of brown sludge rushing into the Zambian countryside was found with horrifying speed. Now, this article was written from the perspective of her interviewing a lawyer who is currently trying to hold Chinese companies accountable for the environmental damage they are doing in the global south. 50 million liters of water surged from a Chinese copper mine in sub-Saharan Africa, flooding farms and wiping out crops. Dead fish floated on the surface of rivers, including Zambian's main artery, the Kafu? I could be saying that very wrong, and if I am, I'm very sorry to the Zambian people. My bad. Downstream, crocodiles and hippos fled the poisoned water now laced with acid and heavy metals. In 2014, China was ramping up its Belt and Road Initiative, pouring more than $1.3 trillion into infrastructure and energy projects across the global south. Over the past decade, China has broadened its reach of repression to include Chinese citizens living abroad. The aftermath of the copper mine spill from a dam holding its waste, known as tailings, the pollution infiltrated drinking water sources for hundreds of thousands of people. For millions more, it tainted rivers they rely on for fishing and irrigation. Residents living below the mine, whose sustenance and income depends on crops they grow and sell at market, lost this year's entire yield. Some people, unaware their water had become toxic, drank from it or bathed in it, and others ate the floating and dangerous fish. One Chinese language report indicated that something had happened at the mine. This was reporting that happened in China. Now, not a lot of reporting was actually done on this flood, and that's what this last quote is talking about. The report said it wasn't serious and there wasn't a dam collapse at all. This could not be further from the truth. And this, folks, kind of goes hand in hand with my point on Chinese imperialism. Now, while I know not everybody agrees with that, and that's totally fine if you don't agree, but my point stands, which is, while China is doing this Belt and Road Initiative to bring industrialization, to bring resources to the global south, that does not necessarily mean that might be what the Chinese government says that it is doing. That does not necessarily mean that is what it is doing. And we can see through disasters like this, through I covered this last week, through them building a dam in the middle of Indonesia, which is currently threatening the existence of an entire species of orangutan. There are certainly ulterior motives that are happening here, and this is because China is not a communist country. Once again, this is a communist show, not a communist broadcast. WRFU is not affiliated. WRFU does not hold the same beliefs as myself, but my point stands. Currently, what's going on in the global south at the hands of imperialist powers is unspeakable, and if the Chinese Communist Party was really out here trying to do uplifting projects in the global south to bring people industrialization, what they would be doing first and foremost is uplifting the working class, is supporting working class Marxist groups who currently are trying to rebel against oppressive governments and oppressive imperialist powers, but that is not what China is doing, because a lot of these projects that are being built right now are not necessarily in the best interest of the folks who are living in these countries, but are for the benefit of the Chinese economy. And the fact is that China owns these these dams and these mines. It's not owned by the people, it's owned by Chinese corporations. And just because China has policies of saying, oh well, you can't have $1 billion or we'll literally kill you, that doesn't actually solve the problem. And in fact, it's mainly it's not actually a policy of a true communist government. Truthfully, China is an oligarchy, same as America, the same as the UK, same as the rest of imperialist powers. That's what they are. You can really tell if a country is imperialist if it has a stock market. That's kind of a telltale sign. I talked about this in my last broadcast, but we can see truly communist countries are countries that are trying to work towards communism do not. Cuba, for example, does not have a stock market. China does. And it's because China over the years has liberalized. And so we can see with disasters like this that are happening in copper mines that are owned, it doesn't matter if it's owned by Chinese companies or American companies or any other imperialist connected industry or company or firm, this is what happens. People suffer. And frankly, the reporting that was happening on this situation in China is very similar to the reporting that happens here in the United States about disasters that we caused, disasters that our imperialist government causes. We can see that the coverage on things like Gaza have been terrible here in the United States. It has been, if you're not an independent journalist or you're not Al Jazeera, then especially the beginning of the genocide, I would argue that the beginning of the genocide started in the 60s, but if we want to talk about after October 7th, there was absolutely no good faith reporting happening on what was happening to Palestinian people. In fact, quite the opposite. Anyone who was Palestinian who was either resisting or wasn't was labeled Hamas, and it is why Israel has justified for 2 years now murdering people. Just cold-blooded murder against the Palestinian people. And while China is not necessarily doing this to people, it is in fact supporting the Israeli government. It is supporting both sides of this. In fact, it's supporting Israel and also trying to support the people of Gaza, which doesn't make a lot of sense. It's basically like the U.S. trying to give aid to Gaza and also giving military weapons to Israel. It's the same principle, and we have to hold imperialist governments by these principles because they will not hold themselves to it. point blank. That's just not how it works. And when it comes to imperialism, when it comes to trying to deal with imperial powers, we must hold the same standards across the board, which is that, frankly, Chinese workers are not being treated fairly, and there is a Chinese proletariat that we must recognize is not the same as the Chinese government, and it's the same with America. I think that when it comes to imperialism, the first thing we need to remember is there are always working people who are being exploited, whether it be in the imperial core or outside of it, because the global south and the global north can exist everywhere. We can see in countries like the United States, we have some of the richest people that live here and some of the poorest. And I don't exactly know the demographic information economically of China. I know they have significantly better living conditions than us, but it is a similar principle where there are Chinese billionaires. And the fact that they exist, even if the Chinese state holds them quote-unquote accountable by marking them, that doesn't negate the fact that they existed in the first place. And under a communist country, which China is not, they wouldn't. And so when we look at stories like the copper mine, I urge people not to be reactionary and immediately either start trying to make arguments as to why this is totally fine, or arguments as to why we need to eradicate China, because usually that comes from fascist rhetoric. What we need to recognize is that China is an imperial power, that they are doing the same imperialism that any other imperialist country is doing, and that there is a Chinese proletariat that we, as an international proletariat, have the same material interests as, and we must not lose sight of that. We must always have compassion for the proletariat across the world, empathy, and understanding that we cannot hold them accountable for what their government and industry is doing, which I'm surprised I have to say that, but I do, because there are a lot of reactionary folks out there who would immediately start using this as a catch-all, like Chinese as a catch-all term for all Chinese people. But America is a very racist country, and I want to ensure that our Chinese comrades are safe. And so understanding that imperialism exists here and that we must treat it the same way as American imperialism is an extremely important step in uniting the international proletariat. And so this kind of brings me to my next story, also from Inside Climate by Gopal et al., Chicago Lead Pipes. Folks who live on Chicago's south side, that's serviced by lead water pipe, a toxic relic found in most old homes in the city and many across the country. Exposure to lead can cause serious health harms, including neurological, kidney, and reproductive issues. Infants and young children are particularly susceptible. Chicago has the highest number of lead water service lines in the nation, with an estimated 412,000 of about 491,000 lines of at least partly made of lead or contaminated with the dangerous metal. For the first time, Inside Climate News, Grist and Webbs, I don't know how to say that, have analyzed city data obtained through a public records request that allows Chicago's residents to see where the problem is most acute and how it intersects with poverty and race. The analysis, which includes an interactive map that allows residents to search their addresses for information on their water lines, found that the toxic pipes plague residents throughout the city across lines of race and class. But majority Black and Latino neighborhoods, including a woman who was interviewed for this article, Ms. Ramirez, including Ramirez's own, bear the biggest burden. In majority Latino census tracts areas that in Chicago average around 1,500 households each, 92% of service lines require replacement. In majority Black tracts, the figure is 89%. That compares to a 74% in service lines in majority white census tracts and 65% in the city's 9 major Asian tracts in and around Chinatown. Among the worst affected are neighborhoods on the south and west sides, where residents grapple with other environmental health concerns due to the concentration of nearby industrial facilities, expressways, and freight trucks, spewing air pollution. Communities there suffer from high rates of chronic diseases and low life expectancy. The 9 community areas with the highest percentage of pipes requiring replacement are all on the south side. The 10th is in Belmont Cragen, a majority Latino neighborhood on the northwest side. All right, folks, there's a lot to unpack there. That all that I just read you was from Inside Climate on the Chicago lead pipes, and they actually mapped it. And as an urban planning major myself in my 4th year, woohoo, almost done, we can see that I actually did something similar where I did some mapping myself for a research that I did last year in Chicago. And this group of folks, journalists, mapped the lead pipe concentration across the city. And this is Chicago proper. This is not including suburbs for those like myself who were at first a little confused. Basically, there's a lot of lead concentration over in the south side of Chicago. And this is not surprising. The south side of Chicago has notoriously been neglected and had some of the worst economic problems. And this is because, as we can see, as they said in the article, unfortunately, black and brown people face the brunt of issues like this. And this is called, folks, environmental racism. Or I would say an offshoot of it. I covered environmental racism a few weeks ago with the data centers that are being built by Elon Musk and company in Memphis, Tennessee. And when it comes to black and brown neighborhoods here over in Chicago, they're 2 hours north of us, it's this very similar principle. When it comes to neighborhoods who require more assistance, more help, that also requires more money. And if those who have it don't want to support these neighborhoods, don't want to, for whatever reason, and it's usually pretty racist, don't, for whatever reason, want to support these neighborhoods through replacing these pipes, these people are the ones that are the most affected. And it's extremely sad and upsetting because these folks, as well as anyone, deserve clean water. We can see over in Flint, Michigan, they still don't have clean water. You know, it's still a problem. And quite frankly, this, I will say, as most everything is a result of capitalism. It is one of the offshoot problems of capitalism, which is that folks who need the most support are not getting them. They're not getting it. Why? Why are they not getting it? Because this is what capitalism looks like at its worst. And capitalism is always at its worst. But it's becoming more visible now. The thing is that when we see folks who are struggling and suffering from exposure to lead pipes, understand that this sets a principle, a standard, that if you are at what capitalism considers the bottom of the barrel, you are going to have to deal with the brunt of the issues. Most of these people probably work more than one job. And many of them have children. And as we can see in this article, kids and infants are the ones that are the most affected by this. Kids are not able to drink water from their tap. They have to go buy it from the store in bottles. And there's also another problem with that. Buying bottled water, first of all, is a scam. This is capitalism right here, folks. Having to buy your water instead of, because it's a basic human right. You just kind of need that to live, but the fact that you have to buy it, ridiculous. Anyway, buying it from a plastic water bottle also has its own problems because of microplastics, which are already showing up in babies and just regular old people, because that's what happens when unregulated industry is allowed to do whatever they want. We've known for a while that not reducing our use of plastics, our use of things that have toxic chemicals will in the long run affect us negatively. That's just that's pretty straightforward. And so for the folks who are struggling and suffering from this lead pipe exposure in Chicago, it's setting a principle, and it has been for a while, essentially saying that if you don't have the capital, if you don't come from a neighborhood which produces or has folks who come from good backgrounds and are able to lobby for themselves and able to speak up for themselves, the help isn't going to come. And even if you are able to, even if you are out there in the streets protesting, saying, "Hey, get these lead pipes out of my house," that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to do anything. Because we can see in across the country on different city councils and boards. They just be electing anyone these days. I saw this problem in a city that I worked for, I interned for. If the council, if the city council, if the board of trustees or whoever, whatever they're called, don't believe it's a problem, don't believe it needs to get solved, or frankly see the problem and don't care, nothing is going to get done. It's just not going to happen. Because we do not live in a democracy. We do not live in a place in which people have equal representation and rights. Because if they did, this would not be happening right now. Point blank. If we lived in a democracy, capitalism would have already been upended. But we don't, because democracy and capitalism, they are mutually exclusive. They cannot coexist. Capitalism requires full control over all means of production to exist. Capitalism is a destructive force in and of itself. And these are working regular people who they want to live in Chicago. They want to contribute to the economy. They want to be part of community. And in fact, it would be in our best interest to support these people because they're our fellow human beings. They're our comrades. And the reason they aren't is because Chicago don't care about black people. Chicago doesn't care about black and brown people. If they did, that this would already have been fixed. This would have already been done, but it isn't. The fact that people are still being poisoned by lead pipes, the fact that this is still happening after we have known for years that it is a problem, the fact that this is not being addressed right now is a problem. And the fact that it's only really affecting black and brown people shows that this has been this problem is a problem of race. That when it comes to supporting our black and brown comrades, the capitalist will not ever show up. The capitalist will not ever show up unless they are forced to. And this goes for across the board. Across the board. We can see in the most expensive parts of Chicago on this map, where it's mostly white people that live there, that the lead pipe problem is not an issue. It is only on the south side, really. I mean, folks, the facts are right there. We have to understand this. And this also goes to say, as a white person myself, that when we are supporting black and brown people, and I have said this multiple times, and I will say it again, it is important not to speak over. It is important to platform, to give support, and to help support their voices in advocating for themselves. Once again, when we are talking about advocacy, it means not taking over the space. It means showing up for people. And as folks try to go out and show up and say, hey, get these lead pipes out the ground, we need to be there in support. Do not take over the conversation. Folks who are trying to talk about their own material conditions, their own conditions, we need to support in listening and being present and actually showing up. And Comrade Marina and I actually talk about this. It means showing up even when it's hard, showing up and being quiet and listening to the people who need to be heard the most. That is what is most important. And this kind of brings me to my last story of the night before I go ahead and play you my segment with Comrade Marina, which is, I have two stories actually. I have the Italian dock workers threatening to shut down the docks if they lose contact with the Freedom Flotilla, which is on this fleet of ships that are on their way to support and bring supplies to Gazans who are currently being genocided. And I also have here locally, reported by the WCIA, the librarians are choosing to unionize. Yay! This is amazing. This is really good. I'm going to spend a short time covering both, and then I'm going to go ahead and play you the first 30 minutes of my segment with Comrade Marina. So, a new flotilla is bound for Gaza, set sail from Genoa on Sunday and Barcelona, with a dock worker warning that if communication with the flotilla is lost, port workers will immediately block all shipments to Israel. And this is reported on by Politico. This is from September 1st by Elena Giordano. This is the show where I mispronounce everyone's name. um, the ships will join the global Sumud Flotilla expedition, which departed from Barcelona on Sunday in an effort to deliver humanitarian supplies through Israel's blockade. Speaking at a rally on the docks of Genoa, on one of Europe's largest ports, a dock worker representing the USB Union said that if communication with the flotilla is lost even for just 20 minutes, port workers would immediately block all shipments to Israel regardless of their content. From this region, 13 to 14,000 containers leave every year for Israel. Not a single nail will leave anymore, he added. In Genoa, a food drive collected more than 300 tons of humanitarian aid. On Saturday, over 40,000 people, including the city's mayor, Sylvia Salis, oh God, I'm so American, joined a torchlight march through the streets to support the mission. Folks, this is showing up. This is showing up, okay? This is putting yourself on the line. If I could swear on air, I would, but I can't. This is called showing up for your comrades. Dock workers saying that they will shut down the docks if they lose contact with their comrades. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about when I say solidarity. We need to put pressure, real pressure. All right? This is how it's done. We need to follow their lead. This is how it's done. If we want to put pressure on the world stage to stop the genocide, this is how we do it. This is one of the many ways that we can do this. It is by forcing them. It is by forcing the international community to respond and to block and to divest and to completely cut off Israel. Because Israel is doing a genocide and Israel shouldn't exist. Israel has been doing a genocide for years at this point. If you want to say it started on October 7th, fine. If you want to say it started in the 60s, fine. Either way, the point still stands. Israel has been doing a genocide, and this is how we force them to stop. We cannot allow Israel to get away with this, because right now, Israel is. And this is completely unacceptable. And so dock workers saying, we will shut this down if we lose contact with our comrades who are trying to go and give support to people who are currently being genocided, that's how it's done, folks. Follow their lead. That's all I can say. All right, last story of the night. Champaign Public Library workers have announced their intent to form a union. In a letter signed by 26 library workers, they said they're asking for living wages, increased benefits, fair hiring practices, and opportunities for advancement, among other requests. This is from WCIA, reported by Molly Sweeney on August 31st. The workers plan to form a union with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Council 31. The workers added that recently library hours have expanded. While this has helped provide the community with more resources and access, it has also increased pre-existing scheduling and staffing issues, the workers have said. The issues the workers are organizing for include living wages and increased benefits for all staff, fair hiring practices and opportunities for advancement, equitable funding and resources dedicated to our Douglas Branch Library, sustainable staffing and scheduling at both CPL locations, transparent internal communications, increased accessibility to both CPL locations, this is CPL stands for Champaign Public Library, for both staff and visitors, a voice in building policies and practices that allow us to serve our community to our fullest potential. And this is coming off the heels of the Urbana Free Library employees joining the union last year. And UIC library workers are also members of this union. Now, while we have our last minute before I play you our segment with Comrade Marina, I just want to say how important and how amazing it is that the librarians are taking this step and that we need to show up and show out, okay? We need to show up for them as they're at the bargaining table. We need to show up if they need to go on strike. We need to show up because this is how we win. This is how we win, by labor organizing and unionizing in order to hold the capitalists accountable, in order to hold oppressive systems accountable and saying, hey, this is not going to fly. No, out. Like this is not how it works. A living wage is not $15 an hour. Folks, I make $15 an hour. That's not a living wage. Never has been, never will be in this economy. And the fact that they have to ask for that it is not just given, shows a clear problem. That right there is a clear problem. So good on the librarians for unionizing. Support our librarians. If you are in the Champaign-Urbana area and you're listening right now, please do your research, talk to the librarians, be open, have conversation, and support them in their unionizing efforts, because this is how we win. It's not by voting as hard as we can. It is by it is by showing up for our unionizing comrades. It is by advocating. It is about listening. It is about organizing, getting in the streets, getting loud, and being part of this, because this is how we win. And so, with the news segment wrapping up, I'm going to go ahead and play you guys my discussion with Comrade Marina, in which we discussed queer labor liberation and labor struggle. I'm super excited for you guys to hear this. It's going to be an amazing segment. And then after that, we'll go ahead and play the end of the hour song, and we'll be out of here. All right. And then look out for the rest of this conversation on my YouTube channel at Communist Bananas or Comrade Felicity. I'm super excited to play this for you guys. And without further ado, enjoy.
Hi, my name is Marina S. I am my pronouns are she and her. I am an organizer with the American Party of Labor, working largely in the Kansas City and Lawrence, Kansas area. Um, in the past, I've worked with the Lawrence tenants as well as KC tenants, as well as some work peripheral to the Trans Protection Party, although I'm not quite as involved with them as much. But just generally, specifically working in tenant organizing, as well as anything having to do with that intersection between worker struggles and LGBTQ IA plus struggles is kind of my main focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And so today we're going to be talking about just queer labor struggle, queer struggle in general. When I was making the post actually to, let people know on the gram and everywhere else that we're going to be doing this, I think like some of the first events that I really thought of that I wanted to cover were things like Stonewall and, like
Mhm.
actual queer struggle that has happened, which has been largely co-opted by corporations and sanitized to their liking in order to use queerness and pride as a means to make, a profit, when in reality a lot of these things started out as like a very grassroots like struggle against the state and institutions which did not want to recognize queer people as human beings. And so from the perspective of a Marxist-Leninist, um, when it comes to queer labor struggle, what's like kind of the first thing that you would want to touch on for people to understand, just a baseline kind of?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, but I would definitely want to start off and um, point out that you can look to the very beginning of um, large scale industrial labor struggles, both in this country and in others, and you will find queer people of varying identities and orientations there on the ground. 1905 in New York City, one of the earliest attempts to unionize garment workers was spearheaded by a woman named Pauline Newman. Um, she was an immigrant from Lithuania, and she became one of the central organizers of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union,
Wow.
and worked as the education director for that organization, including work in their health center, which
Mhm.
did like health education. And through that struggle, she actually met her partner, um, a woman named Frida Miller, and they lived together for 50 years, engaging in both struggles related to both the struggles for unionization as well as improving the lives for working women. So from the very beginning, 120 years ago, there are queer people involved in these struggles. the very first gay rights organization in this country, the first one that really is considered historically significant, an organization called the Mattachine Society, was founded by an individual named Harry Hayes, himself both a very committed labor organizer and at the time a member of the CPUSA, you know, Communist Party USA, and in fact simultaneously um, dealt with a great deal of discrimination at the time within the CPUSA for being a gay man. And at the same time, it did experience quite a bit of discrimination within the Mattachine Society for being a communist. So
Yeah,
there
there's
is, even from
multidimensional.
the 50s.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. There's a serious tension there. So I think that's the first thing that I would want to point out, is from the very beginning, you can find queer people involved in these struggles, and I think that's really important. Obviously, LGBTQIA people are a subset of people. Therefore, the overwhelming majority of us are going to find ourselves just statistically as working class individuals, which means in a lot of ways we are always going to need to be in those struggles because it is very directly um, affecting us, obviously. So that's the first thing. Just look to the
absolutely.
beginning of the history and you'll find us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's so much history of queer people being involved, and you can see just from even like I would say now queerness is kind of used because it's more accepted broadly. It's kind of used as like a talking point almost on who's more accepting of queer people. And I would say there's a lot of revisionism in the capital from the capitalist class who say that you know, other countries which don't bow down to American imperialism, well, they don't like it's like you can see this argument always made about Palestinians and why we shouldn't support
Mhm.
Palestinian liberation. It's because, oh, well, they hate the gays, you know, and that's just like, first of all, extremely racist, because it's the assumption that people who practice Islam and Muslim people and Arabs are somehow backwards and barbaric. That's always been an assumption made about those people, but also acting as though queerness was not uh, basically made illegal for like most of American history, just completely ignoring that fact. You know, American imperialism will use any and every opportunity to say, well, actually, we're so progressive now, which is why you must support us. And it's like, but you weren't always. It's used as a talking
Mhm.
point, you know? And so when I see people using queerness as a queer person, when I see people defending capitalism from the lens of queerness saying, oh, well, queer people are so free here. And it's like, really? Because trans folks have been, you know, criminalized in a lot of ways. You know, we can see that in red states and blue states alike, how trans folks have been oftentimes demonized
Mhm.
in these places and everything. And it's when we look at the labor struggle as well, something I like to think of it as is like, is it always going to be perfect? No, but there is always room for growth in the labor movement, you know, in, you know, under communist ideas. You know, what would you think about that?
Yeah, obviously, I think that to try to use the I would say very dubious levels of acceptance and rights that queer and particularly trans people experience in this country as somehow a feather in the cap of capitalists in critique of communism. It really is obviously a very ahistorical
Yeah.
view. I mean, you only need to look to the 1950s when there was literally a thing called the Lavender Scare, where it was just taken as an assumption of government policy that gay people were intrinsically useful to the threat of communist infiltration, particularly in the State Department, but elsewhere in the United States government. And so therefore, regardless of whatever your political positions were, if you were a gay person working for the American government, you were just seen as somebody either who was just intrinsically more likely to be a communist or more susceptible to being influenced into becoming a sort of unwilling agent. So you can even see not that long ago,
Yeah.
for many of us in living memory, a period of time where being gay, being queer was just seen as, oh, well, you are practically a commie. Um,
Yeah.
that's important to remember. So it has not always been particularly easy in this country for LGBTQ people. And that when it is always very tenuous,
Yeah.
and very susceptible to being taken away.
Yeah, no, most certainly. And it's almost like when I was just talking about, modern day, how queerness is used as a reason to support the American empire. Back in the 50s, like you were just saying, once again, queerness was used against us as a means to say, well, you're just a dirty commie. So here's more
Yeah.
oppression. Here's,
Yeah.
it's the fact of the matter is that the capitalist class couldn't care less about how queer people are treated. Just because gay marriage is legalized doesn't necessarily mean that gay people are wholly accepted. And we can see in labor movement and labor struggle. I mean, people like to look at like the Soviet Union and say, oh, well, they were so regressive in their policies around queer folks and everything. And I'm not going to say that they were perfect. They certainly were not great. But we can see in communist societies, like I believe in Cuba, they just legalized like trans women could change their gender on like their like records or their paperwork and everything. Like they were legally allowed to like change their gender now. Whereas here in the United States, like being trans is like a highly contested thing. And
Yep.
it's like one of my own family members recently told me that if if the United States lifted the sanctions off of Cuba, they wouldn't be communists anymore. And I was like,
Wow. Yeah, that is a staggeringly bold statement to make.
it's a statement for
Um,
sure.
yeah, like obviously I can't speak um to, obviously it is different state by state in the United States, but I can tell you in Kansas and in Missouri, I currently live on the Kansas side of the Kansas City area, but did for a while live in Missouri. And essentially, within the last year, and it was in fits and starts, but um, every trans person that I know in the Kansas City area, in those two states, um, has had their gender markers, if they had them changed, reverted. There is
Oh
challenges to the validity of our name changes if we've gone through legal name changing processes. So, like, um, once again, we imagine that there has been so much progress made. Um, you know, uh, During the Biden administration, oh, look, they turned the colors of the lights on the White House lawn and the trans pride flag.
my
Isn't that
God,
amazing?
Target is selling
Um,
lesbian shirts. Look at them.
exactly, and they're not anymore.
They're not.
It's amazing. It's amazing how quickly. When I first started going to Pride events here in Kansas City, it was kind of just a major topic of irritation, and this is not uncommon. But you would go, and in the sort of Pride event where they would have like a lot of like vendor stalls and things, there was always a couple of organizations that you could guarantee would have tables in the vendor section, and that would be um, the Kansas City Police Department, the FBI, um, any given military branches. There would always be a couple, and then of course the Department of Homeland Security all kind of jockeying against each other to see who was the most progressive. You know, we were the most gay friendly. Um, and now, of course, you know, this year, none of those organizations are present anymore.
Not one. Not one.
And obviously, like, I am, you know, at the end of the day, I'm happy to not see those organizations repped at what is ostensibly supposed to be a political event celebrating a massive uprising, obviously, celebrating the Stonewall uprising. But the reasons they're not there is that it's not politically expedient for them under this current administration. And so we can see how quickly, under our so-called very progressive democratic capitalist society, that open support can be taken away. Literally within a year, it was gone.
And they're more than willing to, is the thing. Like, the American State Department does not give a single, like, does not care at all about queer people. It's simply a talking point for them, whoever's in office at the time. If Trump's in office, okay, screw the gays. We're not about the gays anymore. Bye. But, you know, we have another, if Gavin Gruesome or whatever, Gruesome Newsom, if he let's say he wins in 2028, not that he will because neoliberalism, but like, of course we'll probably see those folks again at Pride, and it's just like, you know, they were never on our side because, once
No.
again, they're always on the side of the capitalist class. And as if Gavin Newsom or any of the Democrats are even on the side of gay people, because I mean, we can see in Democrats like Richie Torres, for example.
Yep.
I am his if Richie Torres has no more haters, it's because I am dead. I am one of the biggest haters of Richie Torres. Because the use of your gay identity as a means to support like fascistic regimes, not even necessarily using his queer identity, but his support for Israel, for example, has been so blatant and rampant, that it's actually hurting queer folks. Because how many queer folks, we can't know how many queer folks have been murdered by the state of Israel, but we do know that queer folks are not safe when they're being constantly bombed, Richie.
Yeah. I, and I'm always shocked when we have this when any kind of version of this conversation, like you mentioned earlier, like, you know, why would you want to have any support for Palestinian liberation? Don't you know how much they hate gays? As if there are no gay, lesbian, trans Palestinians. I guess
Period.
it obviously has never occurred to the people making those arguments, which just demonstrates a further of how much collectively our culture has dehumanized
Queer people.
Palestinian people.
Because they're used as a talking point now. It's
Mm-hmm.
strictly used as a talking point when these people's lives are being put in danger 24 hours, 365, 7 days a week by the state of
Mm-hmm.
Israel. You know, I
Yep.
don't see queer people being evacuated. I don't see people being evacuated at all from the Gaza Strip. You know,
No.
children are dying every single day of a famine. Children who very well could, if we're going to really make this argument, could be queer, you know?
Yep.
So it's like, what kind of argument is that?
No. It's a terrible argument. And meanwhile, once again, individuals within the wider LGBTQIA community in the United States, who once again have this kind of compromised politics, are very fond of like touting out you know, the Tel Aviv LGBTQIA film festival as a reason why people should not support like BDS initiatives.
Uh-huh.
And it's homophobic. What are you not going to support one of the largest queer film festivals? As if that was even remotely the point. And it's a really, really, really successful diversionary tactic for people. to use those kinds of events, and it's really upsetting.
As if
Um,
queer people even have full rights in Israel. They don't. Like, I don't believe you can even get legally married as a gay person in Israel, or you can't get married in the church or in the, like, I'm super fuzzy on the details, but like queer rights, like especially under the Likud party, who is extremely right wing, are not necessarily in good standing with these people in office. They do not care about queer people, you know?
I don't think I'm quite educated enough to really comment there, but it wouldn't surprise me, especially with like as you said, how far to the right, even relative to like baseline politics in Israel, the Likud party is. It wouldn't surprise me if they
Yeah.
weren't exactly particularly supportive of the rights of queer people.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're like, I would say that, especially because I mean, Israel is just a pariah state at this point. They're not like they were specifically put there by Western powers to have influence in the region. Israel is not there. I talked about this in my last one of my episodes with I believe Comrade Ivana. We discussed the genocide and everything going on, and in the lens of queerness and queer people and queer rights. Um, it is not queer rights to bomb innocent people.
No.
And it's like something I think about often is events like the HIV and AIDS epidemic, things that happened not but what, 40 years ago, in which
Hmm.
queer people were in direct harm and danger, and the American government turned the other cheek, as it
Yep.
has done in many other events, like when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans and it
Hmm.
was mainly Black people who were displaced. Suddenly, the American government had no idea what was going on in New Orleans. Suddenly,
Yep.
what happened? I don't see any problem. that's
Yep.
that that is how these things are handled, with marginalized communities, with communities who are being
Hmm.
put in direct harm of an event that is killing us. The
Yes.
HIV and AIDS epidemic um, was a horrific situation, which killed so many innocent, it just regular people,
Yep.
who would just needed medical care. But the Reagan administration did not care because they are extremely homophobic, extremely homophobic.
Yes. Um, and if you kind of like, I've always found like looking at a lot of the documentaries made about the times, particularly like How to Survive a Plague, an excellent documentary if you haven't seen it. Just how many important figures within that kind of very radical militant tradition that was building up in the larger gay liberation movement, through the 60s and 70s. It very successfully killed a lot of that momentum. And I don't necessarily know that I can speak fully that this is responsible, but I feel like outside, when we came out of the AIDS crisis, like into the 90s and the 2000s, and obviously it's still something that is an ongoing concern. This is not something that's over. We really did have, it seems, a much more tame, much more sanitized gay rights movement. Um, and not necessarily saying that you can connect those two things specifically. However, we lost a lot of people, particularly in this country, who were incredibly important um, to the wider organizing and militant movement. And like you said, totally made significantly worse through government inaction, through the denying of funds to research for various medical treatments, something that we're noticing again and again right now with the
Mhm.
denying of research. Um, Literally right now, we've had reduction in both the research for AIDS medication and for the distribution of things like HARP and other forms of medication. So it is interesting how much history rhymes when it comes to the AIDS epidemic. and how much we're
Yeah.
still living the consequences of that.
And like the larger withholding of resources from folks, just regular people, working class people. We can see when the Trump administration came into power just this last year after the election and everything. They stopped allowing AIDS medication to like countries in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And many of those people relied on that medication. They weren't getting it anywhere else because we have effectively destroyed their economies and made them completely reliant on the imperialist powers because that's how imperialism works.
Mm-hmm.
It's directly related to how capitalist modes of production happen and work, especially when we look at the dividing of the working class. The entire working class should be up in arms right now, just alone about the fact that queer people are not being allowed life-saving medications, are being systematically oppressed in the United States because queer people are working people first.
Mm-hmm.
We are part of the labor movement. We are part of the working class. You talked about that with queer organizers even 120 years ago. We've been there. We
Yeah.
are there.
Yes. Um, yeah, I obviously I think there is a pretty established history of how successful using the identity of queer people as a kind of method of division. So um, you mentioned specifically, we are part of the working force. In the 1960s, there was a transgender woman who worked at a General Motors plant in Ohio. She was a long member of the UAW before she transitioned. Um, and very, very active in her union. And it's very fascinating. Now, she has her own page. You can go look her up on the website for the AFL-CIO, and she is celebrated as a hero. At the time, however, um, her union did not support her, and eventually she was able to get support from another local, and she was provided with legal services for helping stand up to employment discrimination and things like that. Um, but the fact is that there has always been kind of this very successful, I don't even know if you would call it a ploy, I don't know how specifically intentional it is, but it's been very good at distracting and not seeing the person as like, no, this is um, a person who has way more materially in common with me in terms of interests than any kind of differences would be present. So there, it is very unfortunate, but it's something that's very present even within union and industrial organizing. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's important to hold institutions like this accountable first and foremost, like labor movements and everything, because if
Mhm.
we want to see true liberation of the working class, then it needs to be liberation for everyone. None of us are free until all of us are free. And we cannot, when it comes to unions, we have seen unions who are much more liberal, um, you know, they kind of abandoned certain what's the word, like they kind of abandon certain social movements because it's more convenient,
Yes.
and instead of actually standing up for what's right, a lot of them it's like, oh well, I mean, we're fine, so it's not a big deal to
Yep.
us. We see a lot of trade unionists who unfortunately voted for Trump.
Hmm.
That's not all trade unionists. I know there are plenty of unions out there who are super progressive, but unfortunately, this is not across the board. And this is because of a lot of division, which is created by the capitalist class in order to keep labor movements from becoming more cohesive and actually creating a larger coalition against the capitalist class. You know, if we create, like, it's like, you know, racism is a tool, homophobia is a tool in order to divide people and keep them apart and separate. You know, like, I would say that I've heard the the point is that we have way more in common with a regular white working class man who's part of a trade union. You know, we all have more in common than we will ever have with like Elon Musk. But a white tradesman nowadays might not see it that way.
Mhm.
And it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think there's also a flip side, which in many ways is potentially going to be even more difficult, which is the very awkward conversation that people within the wider queer community are going to have, which is why is it that in most major cities, if there is a pride event, a significant one. Why is it that most of them are almost entirely organized and directed by the National LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce?
Period.
That is really concerning. Um,
Folks, just because your landlord is gay does not make him a progressive.
yes. Um, yes. I remember um I remember a couple years ago tabling with Lawrence Tennant at the Pride event in Lawrence, Kansas, which once again, very progressive town.
I love
At least
Lawrence.
on paper. Yeah, yeah,
I'm a
Lawrence,
huge
great,
Lawrence
great
fan.
town. Um, but Lawrence also a town incredibly under the influence of its local landlords, and once again, a lot of whom um, are gay, and they're at Pride, and some even harassing people trying to do tenant organizing at Pride. Um, the sheer amount of um, opportunistic individuals who are involved in the planning of the mainline Pride events, it really shows. Once again, if you have the Department of Homeland Security actively recruiting at your event, then there needs to be some serious analysis going on of why is it that not only do we not necessarily see how much we have materially in common with a white factory worker, we also don't understand why we are not in the same boat with a transgender landlord.
Yeah.
We're not. It's simply not, and that is a major problem. And it's good to see more cities organizing people's pride events that are being organized completely outside of the spectrum. Kansas City has a really great one. It's the best pride event that you can go to in town, but still, it's nowhere near as big as the big KC Pride event, which once again completely organized by the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce, and it shows. Like right
Yeah.
down to the fact that you can't even families who go to the Pride event can't even bring picnics or coolers with them because they want everyone to go to the food trucks.
Which
Um,
is
yeah,
ridiculous with these prices. Like, girl,
yep,
do I look like I can
exactly.
afford food truck? I don't have food truck money. Point blank.
No,
I just don't.
you know,
Um,
especially after you spend $15 for a ticket, which these are ticketed events half the time.
which is also ridiculous because, you know, Pride started because of the Stonewall riots and because of, you know, I have it written down the Christopher Street Liberation Day March, you know, which was like
Mm-hmm.
the founding Pride event.
Yep.
And it was completely grassroots, and it was very much based in queer liberation. not in the capitalist sense of queer people should own private property and should become landlords, but queer people are human beings and are part of the larger struggle for liberation across the board, you know? And also, you know, one of my favorite lines from a podcaster I listened to, Matt Bernstein, in the A Bit Fruity podcast, you know, he made an episode kind of on this where he said the first Pride event was sponsored by Capital One. Like, and like that, I think in like, unironically, I think a lot of people do think of Pride that way. They think of
Yep.
Pride as like a sponsored event by a bunch of corporations who literally could not give less of a shit about us.
No.
Like who like 20 years ago would have like fired you if you were if they found out you were trans. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
you know, like we see with you know, like Homeland Security and the FBI at these events and everything. um you know, they aren't there because they care so much about queer people and they just want more queer representation. They are there to make a statement. You know, they are there
Mhm.
to say we can be here if we want and we don't have to
Mhm.
be here if we don't want to. You know, like
Exactly.
we control the narrative here. And it's
Mhm.
the same with the capitalist class. They make Pride look like a super fun, shiny event, which it is. Pride is a joyful event. Pride is amazing. You know, it's meant for queer folks to be able to come out and celebrate ourselves because we should be able to. But when it's co-opted by capitalist greed and when it's taken over by capitalist narratives, all of a sudden we forget where we came from. You know, we forget
Mhm.
how we were able to become so visible. We didn't get
Yeah.
here by lobbying. We didn't get
No.
here by going to Washington in our nice little suits and being like, will you please give me rights? Like,
Mhm.
we got here through like actual class struggle. Like, the Stonewall
Yep.
riots were first and foremost a class struggle.
Yes. Um, I think because like over the years, like the mythologization of Stonewall has been while completely understandable. I do think we've kind of forgotten, you know, a lot of the very key important details, and one that at least is very interesting to me, maybe not to everyone, but particularly in relation um, to Pride events now, is the Stonewall Inn was a mob owned bar. Now that's not unique. At a time when, you know, being gay was criminalized, most of the bars that catered to gay people were mob owned. But at the same time, it has been documented very, very well that first of all, it was known for watering down the drinks that were served, jacking prices very, very high up so that they could extract large amounts of money from their clientele who had no other option but to be there. And then what's also very interesting is while this has not necessarily been confirmed, there have been multiple people who have said that the ownership of the Stonewall had standing arrangements with the New York City police where they would cooperate with any raids um, arresting the clientele, provided that the police never arrested so many people that they wouldn't come back, that it wouldn't long term affect the business, the very successful business of extracting money from this sort of captive market. Um, and that was a major uh, uh, motivation behind the riots. If you listen to the people who have kind of reported that narrative, of we are this like I said, a captive market. We can't go anywhere else. And what happens? We're being exploited, and um, the very places we are going are actively cooperating with the police who want to arrest us. And how do we celebrate, you know, that uprising against those conditions, but we have events that are wildly extractive, that you cannot enjoy if you do not have large amounts of money to spend on all of the things, and that are openly collaborating with those same authorities that, like you said, 50 years ago would be arresting us.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how full circle this Pride events have come in. Not that long, you know. It's not like Stonewall and the first Christopher Street Liberation Day was that long ago. It didn't take us long to have these completely compromised events.
Yeah, exactly. And it's because queer people once again have been used and used and used by the capitalist class as a means of exploitation,
Mm-hmm.
to make money off of us. We've
Yep.
seen this just in the example that you just made, and also in the fact that we see representatives in our current day, Congress who use queerness, like the Democrats use queer people as a means to hold the working class hostage, saying, if you don't vote for us, all of your rights will be taken away. And it's like, that's not liberation and that's not protecting queer people. That's using us, using it. They do the same thing with black folks. We've seen that when Joe Biden was like, you're not black unless you vote for me. And it's like,
Yep.
whoa, first of all, that's crazy. Like, okay, white man, thank you. Second, like, it kind of makes me like a loss for words, because I'm like, that's not actually representing queer people's interests. That's not representing our needs and our need for liberation. That's just holding the working class hostage even more and saying, well, if you support queer people, then you're going to vote for us because we're the only party that cares about queer people. And it's like, actually, you
Mm-hmm.
kind of don't, because if you did, then you would be doing way more to fight for the rights of trans folks. Like,
Yeah.
it's just kind of icky.
Yep. And yet um somehow it is still a very effective line that works on people within our community. um I mean, famously, recently, there was a very well known transgender YouTuber who basically made a series of tweets related to um, the recent solidarity with the Palestinian Liberation Movement, in which she doesn't come out and say it explicitly, but largely kind of places the blame um, for Trump winning the election at the feet of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, and how she, as a trans person, is deeply, deeply affected
Are we talking about
by
ContraPoints?
this. Yeah, I was trying to
Ah!
saying the name, but
No,
like
call her out.
as somebody who for a brief amount of time like watched a lot of her material,
Me too.
I was just like, how
How
is
can
this
you?
where we're at? um
I need to get on my soapbox about this real quick when you're done, because
yeah, no.
you have pinged something in my brain that just made me be like, okay, now this is my time to talk about ContraPoints real fast, because I was extremely radicalized by ContraPoints, is the thing.
So many of her videos, yeah, like 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yes, thank you. Like, you bringing her up is such an important topic, I think, especially around the conversation around how queer folks also treat collective liberation. Certain queer folks, not every queer person, but certain queer people treat collective liberation as like having stipulations and saying, like something that she made said in her statement on Reddit, of all places. Why?
The
Like, I, I saw that and I was like, this is crazy. I don't even know what to say. She basically blamed Palestinian people. Like, I'm gonna come out and say it. She blamed the Palestinian and the Palestinian labor. Like she basically said, "Are Palestinian people being genocided?" However, and then
yeah.
try to use the, well, I'm a marginalized identity. I didn't want Trump to win, and I'm just like, okay, I get it. I am as well. But like, I'm gonna come out and say it. I didn't vote for Kamala Harris because um she's complicit in genocide. That's where I draw the line. If you cannot draw the line at genocide, if you cannot yourself as a human being look at the situation, and I'm also privileged in the fact that I live in Illinois. I just want to make that clear. I live in a locked blue state right now. So I don't have to, if I lived in Pennsylvania, it might be a different conversation. But I live in Illinois. I have the political ability where I can choose if I wanted to vote for Kamala Harris. And I chose not to because I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, as a queer person, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris because she would have kept me so safe. She would have kept me so secure.
That is such a dubious premise anyway,
Yeah,
considering that she pretty much all but came out and said that don't anticipate her to be um, some savior to the transgender community. She wasn't ever. I mean, she pretty much made statements to the effect that she was not going to come to the defense of our community. So it's such a weird thing that she staked out, and such a ghoulish statement. I didn't even anticipate to like really have a lot to say about it, other than to say like I was genuinely like shocked and embarrassed. It was such an awful statement to read.
I was
Um,
embarrassed for her community because I was like, y'all cannot be making like you are you really making arguments for why you think she's correct?
yeah,
Like they started banning people who were just, like constructively criticizing why she was wrong. And I'm like, if you are banning other queer folks, especially from talking in this Reddit like board about why she is wrong, then you are not like in solidarity.
no,
You are actively helping a narrative that Palestinian people are somehow responsible for the genocide
yeah,
because it's not Americans who are spreading, because she made this statement, and but this was part of her statement. She said, that Americans were the ones that were spreading photos of, people dying of famine and everything, and a man-made famine, and children being
mhm,
blown up. Um, and she tried to say that it was Americans and American communists and leftists who were doing this. And I'm like, no, it was
no,
Palestinian people who were showing these photos because they're the only ones that are allowed to, like, they're none of us are allowed in the Gaza Strip. How do you think these photos got out?
yes, um, yeah. It is remarkable. The kind of gymnastics that some people within our community um have gone to, not only just to assume um, that um, Kamala Harris was going to, significantly defend our rights, but that somehow it is these various marginalized communities. And we can also see that if it's not gonna if they're not laying blame at Palestinian people, it will be undocumented immigrants. That is a major thing. We've seen before, time and time again, um, various pride events purposefully not wanting to allow any kind of involvement from individuals from undocumented communities. It's remarkable how isolated and atomized their view of liberation is.
Yeah, and
Imagining that this is happening on an island in a vacuum and it is not connected to any other struggles.
yeah, this is, I think, a huge problem within the queer community, especially, I'm going to say it, white queer folks who don't want to be made uncomfortable by the realities of racism and the realities of what people of color have been through in this country. ContraPoints has made very clear that she calls herself a social democrat. She is not. She's a Democrat. Um, she is down with the Clintons. I'm just gonna say it right now. She's down with the Clintons, and if you're down with the Clintons, you are not a social democrat.
Yep.
um, but not that I'm gonna sit here and defend social democrats at all. But anyway, um, I'm just what made me so upset about that statement, especially with the way it makes her look. as well as a prominent queer figure, it makes her look like she's pretty racist for that. It was
Yeah.
extremely racist. And her community was not at all willing to let that talk about that. Like they did not at all want to talk about how extremely racist that statement was. And it's because white queer folks are still white. We're still white. We cannot firsthand understand what people of color are dealing with every single day. And to not hold ourselves accountable and see how our perspectives can be like different and muddied by the fact that we have not had to deal with those problems is a huge blind spot. And I don't think enough queer people are willing to look at that and say, this is multidimensional. There's a lot going on here, and we do have struggle. We absolutely do. But we cannot sit here and say, I am the only one that's struggling. And your perspective makes me uncomfortable, so I'm just not going to talk about it. Because that's not being in solidarity.
No, no, it's not. I think it's something that I have kind of I've kind of come to experience recently, in particular, because one of the things that I love about the city that I live in is there has been some pretty phenomenal responses to organizing around community defense, from our neighbors getting kidnapped by ICE agents. Um, Not a lot of which I would want to go into, but I did notice in some of the organizing spaces that were kind of set up very specifically, and I kind of have to be a little critical of my own demographic here. A lot of the chats that I was in that were particularly focused around transgender women. There were a lot of calls like, hey, we need to help and show up, for these events and these various community efforts. And at the same time, there were, a lot is probably a little over dramatic, but certainly a vocal minority of individuals kind of taking over the conversations and saying, well, like, we can't put ourselves at risk. Don't you know how dangerous it is for us to find ourselves arrested or in prison? This fight over protecting our neighbors, it's not our fight. And in the back of my mind, and what did end up getting expressed a lot in the conversations are, do you have any idea how isolated and alone you've made any transgender person in this chat who are undocumented themselves, have friends who are, have relatives who are? You've shown them that this community does not have your back.
Your solidarity has stipulations all of a sudden.
Exactly. And it's provided I don't have to do anything that makes me feel uncomfortable. And once again, I don't want to pretend like I'm not, occasionally terrified of the thought of being at an event and experiencing any kind of negative interactions with the police, arrest, or anything. I am. But at the same time, like, once again, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the gay liberation movement with Stonewall and the Compton cafeteria riots, if those individuals were more afraid of confronting the police and the state than they were of just having basic access to dignified treatment and civil liberties, we would have none of the access that we have today. You want to talk about gay marriage? None of that would be present in our lives if we didn't have those initial generations who are like, no, we are less afraid of arrest and of potential violent treatment than we are of continuing to exist in these conditions. And are we going to pretend like getting arrested in late 1950s or early 1960s as a transgender woman was somehow not a scary prospect. It couldn't have been amazing. um,
No.
and yet they were prepared to face those consequences. And our communities are going to have to rediscover that ability to fight if we are going to in any way survive the next couple of years.
I agree with that. And I also think that it's really important to point out, just from what you were saying, that there's this kind of expectation among the queer community that Black and brown queer folks, trans folks are supposed to come out and show up and show out for liberation. But all of a sudden, when it's made about specifically um, liberation for Black and brown people and coming out in solidarity for them, all of a sudden, sorry, excuse me, sorry, he keeps trying to come up here, and I'm like, no. Like,
Aw, just wants to be involved.
I know, but he can't.
Clearly they have thoughts.
He does. He has a lot of opinions. But all of a sudden, when Black and brown people expect white queer folks to come out and show up and be like, hey, we need support too, all of a sudden white people are like, oh, but I could be put at risk. And it's like something my mother
Mm-hmm.
always told me growing up. And she still tells me this now, and it's important, I think, for more and more people to really think about this. It's not always about you.
No.
It's not. Like, I'm gonna be so real. Like, those community action events you were talking about, but like I believe Casey Tennant is putting on a lot of that, like education around like how to, how to deal with ICE. It's not
Yep.
for us. It's for the folks who are it's for us to help protect the folks who are being victimized by these agencies. It's not about us. It's about how we can help them. It's about how we can support them. Like, I really need more white people, honestly. And I am speaking to white people at large. It is not about us. It is not about us. When it comes to the liberation of Black and brown people, we are a supportive role. We are not meant to take over the space. We are not meant to sit here and speak for these people. We are meant to be supportive. And understanding how these things are not always about us, I think can really help people and help folks understand that solidarity doesn't mean when it's convenient for you. It means coming together for a collective good, you
Yeah.
know? And more people need to understand this.
Yeah. And if nothing else, obviously this isn't like the reason that I would hope would motivate people.
No.
But if for nothing else, I it really frustrates me um, when these kinds of arguments are put forward, and I have to say, do you imagine that it is going to stop with any whatever the population currently being targeted? Do you think it's going to stop with oppression of undocumented people? Do you think it's going to stop with Palestinian liberation movements? Do you think it's going to stop with transgender people? There is a very famous poem in every any Holocaust museum you go to that most people are aware of. The first they came for the socialists
Mm-hmm.
poem. It is not like any of us are truly safe. Um, and really, we need to be showing up for everyone
Yeah.
because it really is obviously not necessarily everyone, but most working class people are in some way affected by this. And we really should show up out of a sense of empathy for our neighbors. But if for nothing else other than just basic self-preservation, you're gonna have to struggle eventually.
You're gonna have to suck it up and struggle eventually, because I'm sorry, but like, folks out here who are thinking that they can, like, I hear a lot of people, I've heard my own family members say this, who are on the progressive side, who don't want to do the class struggle part because it's too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, okay, do you think that any of the rights that we got today happened because we put on our little suits and we went to Washington and we lobbied like good Americans? No. No. Like, black people did not get the right to vote because they were so polite about it, because we were all so polite about it. Like, black people got the right to vote because of the civil rights movement. And the fact is that like, if we didn't have movements like that who had to do some form of class struggle in order to force the capitalist class to give us rights,
Yep.
um, it's just, it's appalling. It's astounding to me how people can forget about these things and have some kind of like historical amnesia and say, "Oh, that didn't happen," you know? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, the only way that we got the rights that we have now is because people put themselves on the line. People showed up. You know, it's we these things aren't just handed to us because the capitalists feel so bad, because they're like, "Oh, well, you've been so good. Let us give you some rights. You've been so nice." That's not how it works.
No. And it also was not as much as the West Wing would like us to believe because of um uh the uh, altruism of liberal politicians either. I mean, we just passed the anniversary of the Battle of Blair Mountain, you know, the largest labor uprising in the history of the United States. If you look at the history of the labor organizing in this country, of the union movement, it has been a very intense struggle. If you like having a 5-day work week, if you like having uh, the right not to be paid in company script, you know, which isn't obviously an enshrined right we have, but if you like not living in a company town,
Yeah,
um, all of these things that are in many ways trying to be revived by companies like Amazon. Those things, those were fought for, and in some cases that was very literal.
yeah,
Literal pitched battles between mining unions and Pinkerton agents and things like that. This was a very intense struggle, and that is the case, like you said, um, with any kind of rights being extended to working class people.
absolutely. It's the fact is that you know, these I believe what it, like, you know, the Stonewall riots. I'm fuzzy on the details. I had a long work week, so I didn't get a ton of time to prepare for this episode, but I believe a woman died as a result during the Stonewall riots, or you know, people were seriously injured fighting for their rights, you know, fighting for um just 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 the right to exist as we are, as we want to
Yeah.
be, you know?
Yeah. And not just that, we tend to talk about the Stonewall uprising almost like it was a single. It took place over days. It
Yeah,
was not
it did.
like it was not a short thing. And it was very very sad. And once again, even with the fact that the Stonewall uprising lasted for several days, um the individuals involved with it also knew that they had not accomplished the goal of liberating our community with that event, which is why almost immediately after that, um, in major cities across the country, organizations with the same name started popping up, which was the Gay Liberation Front. You
Hmm.
can kind of look, there's dozens of organizations called the Gay Liberation Front, all of which popped up within a month of the Stonewall uprising. Um, and you had organizations like STAR, one of my favorite groups to bring up with, which was the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, founded by Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Um, Not only were they an incredibly important, although short lived, organization for confronting in political strikes and things like that. But they established an attempt at providing social housing for trans people. Star House was a major project of theirs. They made contact with Fred Hampton and engaged in the 1970 Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention, where Rivera sat down with Huey P. Newton. Huey P. Newton himself wrote an article about the need for calling between an alliance between the Black Panther Party, the kind of very early nascent women's liberation movement, and the gay liberation movement. So this was something that was on a lot of people's radars, even individuals that we don't tend to associate with being involved in the gay liberation movement. Star even published a political platform for their organization calling for free clothing, education, food, and healthcare. It was essentially modeled directly on the Black Panther Party's 10-point program. So even that early, the kind of principal figures in the gay liberation movement understood that this was not this abstract struggle for like civil liberties. This was a struggle for the meaning of their material needs: clothing, education, food, healthcare, and most importantly, housing. So many members of the community at that point were unhoused.
Yeah.
And so it was an important part from the very beginning. The struggle against capitalism was built into the queer liberation movement.
Absolutely. There's this kind of like sentiment, I think, a lot of historical revisionism around like queer rights and how queer people, queer organizations and like how queer people have organized over the decades against capitalism, because a lot of our identity and our events are now co-opted by institutions like the Democratic Party, who use our identity as a means, as a vehicle, as I talked about at the beginning of our conversation, to hold the working class hostage, basically, and to say, if you don't support us, then these people won't have rights anymore. And that's not liberation, not by any
No,
means. That's not liberation. Using queer people as a way to using our identity, our past struggles and our current struggles as a platform to say, to hold the entire working class hostage, instead of supporting transformative movements like Star, who I don't believe exists anymore, but
no,
are an organization that we should be modeling after, that we should be looking at and saying that's the kind of organization that we should be looking to create. The Democrats have no interest in doing something like that. And I'm actually going to be doing an episode in a couple weeks, I think, with a comrade from the central region on the Kamala Harris campaign.
can't wait to listen to that.
That's going to be an interesting one. But I think that, there's this kind of historical revisionism around how queer people, again, have gotten our rights. And there's like, I didn't even know about Star until you just told me about it. I didn't know about these organizations. And I'm a queer person who has been very entrenched in queer liberation. And it's because these organizations are often erased from our collective understanding of how queer liberation even happened. A lot of white folks love to use MLK, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. They're like, I have a dream. And they love to quote Martin Luther King and then turn around and say, if you don't vote for Gavin Newsom in 2028, you suck. And it's like, okay, Martin Luther King was like a socialist, and
Was. Yes, he was.
like, it's astounding to me how people can use these revolutionary figures and completely sanitize them.
Mm-hmm.
But they do. They do, and we have to fight back against that as much as we can, because when we start to remember where we came from, our roots, how we were able to be so visible.
Yeah.
Queer visibility didn't just happen overnight where we were able to go outside one day and express who we are and people didn't attack us for it. These things happened over decades of struggle, um, and acting as though we can say, oh well, the struggle doesn't have to happen anymore because we got the right to gay marriage in what, 2015?
Yeah, and who
Wow.
knows how much longer we'll have that.
Yeah.
Um,
Actually, like, again, back to the my point about how Palestinians are treated. Like, gay marriage wasn't legalized in the US until 2015 on the federal level.
nope.
Like, it's not like we've had this right for decades at this point. We haven't. It's been 10 years now.
Yeah. And I think like not at the risk of being like myopic on this, like obviously the easiest way for me to really like process like um how progressive, how pro LGBTQIA community is the United States is through my own experiences, obviously as a transgender woman. Something that um, I learned several years ago. I don't know the degree. I don't know if it's exactly if it's true anymore, but around 2021, 2022, um, they there was a list published of the countries that performed um, the most gender confirmation surgeries for transgender people, um, and the second the second most gender confirmation surgeries performed in any given country, second only to Thailand, was Iran. Now, that is very, very surprising when I tell people that. And like I said, I haven't looked this up in the last couple of years, so it might have changed. Um, but the fact is that there is more acceptance of transgender people. Now, there are other limitations. For example, they have to be in uh, heterosexual relationships. That being said, um, a country that is often like held up in the United States as one of the most regressive and oppressive, and once again, anti-queer countries in the world, I would have more access to gender affirming healthcare in Iran than I do in Kansas.
Right.
Um, and so, like, how is it that we can even remotely presume in this country um, to critique anyone's treatment of our community, given how truly tenuous our rights are in this country?
And also the fact that our country is willing to withhold um like resources not only from our own citizens but from other countries which actively relied on things like USAID or USAID, I
Yep.
believe. Like, that's not pro queer. That's not
Nope.
being for the queers. That is absolutely not only, once again, holding queer people hostage, but just outright denying access, um, because these institutions are inherently oppressive towards queer people.
Yep.
That's how they work. I'm not going to sit here and be Iran's biggest defender because I have,
No.
oh, the Ayatollah is terrible. Like, not like the institutions in Iran have proven that they are, not sustainable and have obviously a lot of problems. However, acting as though we in the United States are so sophisticated that we are so accepting, we're so progressive. And I'm like, Ronald Reagan was our president like 40 years ago.
Yep.
Like, we we supported apartheid South Africa
Yes, we did.
until what, the 90s?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, come on, I was born in the early 2000s. The United States didn't stop supporting apartheid South Africa until I believe almost the very end of
Yeah.
apartheid South Africa. Um, and again, and there's also a lot of revisionism around Nelson Mandela and if he was, actually did like armed struggle, which he did. Like, come on, people. But like, it's acting as though the United States has always been like this beacon of freedom and this leader of the free world, which has never been the case.
No.
Um, and that's inherent to capitalism right there,
Yes.
like when kind of going a little off topic, but still related. The United States, when the COVID-19 pandemic was happening, Cuba had to develop its own vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And they did. The
Yes, they
only
did.
problem, they didn't have access to needles. That is how destructive American and just imperialism in general is. Um, Life-saving medication on a global scale, which like the entire world was dealing with, and the United States is still willing to have those sanctions on Cuba, even though Cuba has some of the best doctors, has some of
Yes.
like I mean that alone is proof enough how the United States feels about communist countries and about
Mm-hmm.
worker-owned means of production. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It is truly, truly remarkable. And once again, like you talk about um COVID and just the incredible similarities between that and the United States government's reaction to the AIDS epidemic. And
Mm.
just in general, the failure of poor and working class peoples when there's any kinds of health crisis. It really is staggering just how much not only are they prepared to maintain something like the uh, uh, embargo of Cuba, but just in generally condemn as many poor and working people as need be to a tremendous reduction in access to resources.
Yeah,
It's awful.
absolutely. And kind of to end this out, back in Colorado where I came from before I moved to Illinois, a trans woman was murdered. Um,
Mhm.
Unfortunately, her name was Jax, and she was missing for 7 weeks.
Yeah,
I tried my best to keep up with the story as much as I could because Denver was my home for 6 years. I was in solidarity and in community with a lot of the organizations that are currently trying to fight for justice for Jax. Um, but she was found in an alley. And she was dead. And the Lakewood police were not willing to call it a hate crime.
no,
And I'm like, a trans woman goes missing and it turns up dead. And like, I don't even know what to say because we have seen over and over and over again how trans women are repeatedly victimized, murdered, and then their deaths are not taken seriously
no,
at all.
no. I mean that goes back to once again one of the first major figures in the movement for the liberation of transgender women, Marsha P. Johnson. Famously was found murdered in 1992, very shortly after that year's Gay Pride March. Um, as of right now, um, that is an unsolved murder. Nobody knows. There are varying theories, including connection to police violence and other things, but this is a very common thread in the experience, obviously, of trans women, and particularly um, trans women who are also part of oppressed nationalities. It's a tremendous thread that goes through that experience. So um, it is genuinely upsetting in some ways how little progress we have made. but it also shows that like we know what we need to do.
Yes, it's very
Um,
obvious.
yeah.
If we want justice for people like Jax, who was obviously killed in a hate crime, like
Mhm.
I don't need to see I don't need to know the events that happened to know that Jax was murdered because of a hate crime against trans
Yeah.
women. And if we don't want this to continue, which we absolutely shouldn't want this to continue, then we need to be honest with ourselves and see that the police being at Pride does not make us safe
No,
because
it
the
does not.
police are not willing to see the crimes that happen against us as hate crimes because we are not seen as people to them.
No, we are not.
We're not. The FBI, the CIA, Homeland Security, we're not seen as human beings to them.
Oh,
No, not at all. They are just as willing to show up to Pride to co-opt our movement and then leave when it's no longer socially acceptable. There is no solidarity with these institutions. There is no changing them from the inside. There is no reform that is going to bring justice for people like Jax.
no. And not to like right at the end really kind of take things off the rails, but a few months ago I had to look. I think it was in October, but I think I've lost. There was a massive demonstration in Kansas City on the steps of the Liberty Memorial, which is our World War One memorial, that was done by I want to say it was about 120 members of the Patriot Front. It was very coordinated. They kind of showed up very quickly, did their um, very, very pathetic little
With masks
demonstration.
on, by the way. They couldn't even show their own faces.
No, yeah, no, with the exception of the head organizer, but famously, or not famously, but very conspicuously, when they tried to march through the city, a kind of ad hoc group of counter protesters organized itself and was trying to like block their march. And when the police finally did show up, um, they first of all made sure that all of the counter protesters were moved away. And then, more or less, this is not the word I'm sure they would use, but kind of escorted the Patriot Front activists,
I'm
made
sure they
sure that
did.
they could get back to their vans safely because they wanted to, just not turn it into any kind of scene of violence, as if their presence there
Isn't
was not
violence
in itself
itself.
an act of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the same KCPD police officers who I am supposed to like assume are going to keep me safe at a Pride event. No,
Yeah, no, that's
no, they
not.
no.
It's like I talked about this recently, but back in April, I go to the U of I. I'm a University of Illinois student, and the University of Illinois allowed Charlie Kirk to rent out Fullinger
Yeah.
Hall and hold an event. And the folks who organized the counter protests, some of which were queer, we only about 100 of us showed up to protest against, and there were 3,000 people who showed up
Mm-hmm.
for Charlie Kirk, a
Yep.
known white nationalist, great replacement theory believer, and disgusting human being at that. And the fact that the university allowed someone like Charlie Kirk to rent out Follinger Hall and use it as a platform to spread his disgusting hatred of anyone that's not a cisgendered white man um, shows me how much this university does not give a single shit about us. Not one. Because they
Same
didn't
thing happened at KU in Lawrence.
back in
KU loves to have I cannot remember the name. I'm so embarrassed now
no,
of
it's okay.
the former the former swimmer turned anti.
Oh, that one
Um,
that one bitch. What's her name?
I
Fuck.
cannot for the life of me remember.
Riley Riley something.
Yeah. She had
Riley
a little
Gaines.
event. Yes,
I
yes.
hate her. Biggest hater.
Yeah, and she had a little event at KU as well. Once again, counter protesters were out, and once again, KU police. Why the KU has their own police department is uh,
Beyond me.
I'm beyond me. But once again, very disruptive, just like they were disruptive against the Palestinian Liberation a solidarity encampment that happened on KU campus. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, these universities, I don't care how much they try to do DEI. I don't care. I don't give a shit because ultimately if like back in the 60s, I believe it was Huey P. Newton who tried to also rent out Follinger Hall
Yep.
to talk at the U of I, and they didn't let him. So I
Yep.
know for a fact that they had the opportunity to tell Charlie Kirk no, and they didn't.
No.
And it tells me 100% that this
All you need
university,
to know.
they are not here to protect me. They are not here to support
Yep.
me. And it's why I'm organizing actively against the university, even though I'm getting my degree from them,
Yep.
because they are currently supporting a genocide. They are not divesting, which is a huge problem, in my opinion. Um, and it's just an objective problem because um, it is going towards the murder of children,
Mm-hmm.
and acting and queer folks who don't think that we are at risk because the university is willing to fund things like that understand we absolutely are. We absolutely
Yeah.
are at risk because they are willing to platform people who want to see us dead,
Mm-hmm.
point blank.
Yep. Yeah, it's just like it is just like KU with their partnerships with ICL, which is a major company in the white phosphorus supply chain. And they, they have their facility in Lawrence. They're connected. I if I'm unless I'm very much mistaken, I don't have my notes with one. They're connected, I believe, with the chemistry department at KU. It is profound how much these universities are complicit in the ongoing genocide, and once again, how that just trickles down into everything else that they support.
Mm-hmm.
It's truly upsetting.
Yeah, and it shows that they are not a safe haven against bigotry and things of that nature because it's I have been extremely disillusioned by the university system when I got to the U of I. I started out at community college. Like many other folks who don't have access to funds to be able to go to a four-year school immediately after high school. Even I graduated from Arapahoe Community College in Littleton, Colorado, and they also platformed Charlie Kirk, which I was very upset
Yeah.
about. I when I came to the University of Illinois, I thought I was going to get a master's degree from them. I thought I was going to be doing a lot more there. But after my first year, I was extremely disillusioned, and I'm more than ready to graduate now. I'm a senior, yay! But I realized I'm like there is no hope for the ivory tower. For folks
No.
out there who are trying to escape, anti-queerness and all of these things by just going and doing research for universities and working for a university and saying, oh, well, I just don't want to be a part of it. You still are. There is no, there's no escaping it by going and going up the ivory tower and ignoring what's happening because our universities are still supporting these things. Our universities have not been safe spaces for queer people historically.
No.
Our universities have allowed chapters like the KKK to exist, which has been in direct opposition to the existence of Black people.
Yep.
None of us are safe. None of us are free until all of us are free. And these universities are just as complicit as any corporation is.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so we're at time. Thank you. This was such a productive conversation. I loved it.
It was. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you. I hope to have you on for more episodes because you're such a good speaker and you're so knowledgeable.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad I was engaging at the very least.
Oh, no, you were amazing, folks. Comrade Marina, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm going to go and stop recording.